Phobia is a villain in the DC universe who can sometimes be really powerful, but other times she isn't. It really always depends on who's writing her. But the baseline for the character is actually very interesting. However, it's an idea that other characters will kind of rob her of. She was a part of the second Brotherhood of Evil, debuting with the group in the New Teen Titans issue 14 from 1981. She's a rather aggressive empath with emotional control that affects the individual's mind, and can make them see hallucinations. As well as being able to read one's thoughts, and sometimes she can even control one's mind. I say sometimes because for some unknown reason she seems to not be able to sometimes, or perhaps the writer just forgot. But in canon, there isn't really an explanation of why that is. Perhaps she just forgets sometimes that she has these abilities. Angela Hawkins discovered at an early age she was an empath, and her parents shipped her away to a mental hospital. Her powers would cause those around her to crack, and she felt abandoned by her family, because she kinda was. When she finally managed to get out of the hospital, she just became an outcast out there in the world. For literal years, she was completely alone, and her biggest fear is to be alone. That's when the brain of Monsieur Mallah came to her, inviting her to join the new Brotherhood of Evil. This was because there was a bit of dispute with Madame Rouge about the power in the group, so they kind of band together to make a new version. Other members will be Warp, Plasmus, and Hougan, the latter of which is an extremely racist character, so I'm not really going to go into his character in this video. Anyways, this team would become recurring villains to the Titans, and during all that, she would have a storyline about her going on a murder spree in New Zealand, which was stopped by the Tasmanian Devil. Afterwards, Phobia would become kind of an adversary for Raven. This was because both were empaths. However, Madame Rouge would have a plot where she wants revenge, so she teams up with a character named Captain Zal, who the Brotherhood of Evil also dislikes, to try to kill them. So the Brotherhood actually makes a truce with the Titans to defeat their common foes. And we learn something new about Phobia. When Raven attacked her mentally, we learned that in more detail of her fear in being alone, and it seems as perhaps she could be redeemed. However, that will kinda get forgotten about because that never happens. During Crisis on Infinite Earths, Phobia would go missing, with there being real no explanation of why she went missing or where she went. It was just a passing by statement made by the modder since he needed an empath. And Phobia was just missing, so he couldn't use her. So instead he went with a Psycho Pirate to help him instead, only for him to betray him, but that's an entirely different story. After this, Phobia as a character wouldn't really show up except for an occasional cameo here and there. Still as a villain, which is a little confusing considering the fact that she was being set up for redemption. But through these years where the character was kind of inactive, a lot of characters kind of stole what made her a character. Phobia's aggressive empathic abilities would be snatched away by Raven. Phobia's love of fear was given to Scarecrow. And Phobia's distinct ability to shift people's minds into giving them the worst state in their dream form was given to Dr. Destiny. So a lot of what made her a character was kind of given to other characters, and there wasn't really room for her anymore. She would, however, show up in the Manhunter series as a recurring villain. Where there isn't really anything noteworthy to mention, she is just there fighting Manhunter. She would return in a more established role in Salvation Run, a series from 2008, where she, like many other villains, were on a planet called Salvation, where she would ally herself with Vandal Savage, and would help his team of villains throughout the series. She would also show up in the Secret 6 comics, as she was one of the villains who went after the Get Out of Hell free card, where she lost, pretty surprisingly, because she's actually an empath, so when you think about it, couldn't she have easily won? I suppose she's probably just there to fill up the ranks, because they probably didn't have, a lot of villains they could have picked from. And Phobia will kind of stay in that area. A villain who wasn't picked purposely, but instead just because they had to fill up the ranks. For example, Cheetah at one point makes her own secret society to fight Wonder Woman, and Phobia was a part of it. And she was just really there, doing absolutely nothing. Luckily though, in 2010, she would finally return in a way that was not a cameo or just wasted. In 2010, she would rejoin the Titan series, where she would finally get to do something. She would attack the Titans after the destruction of Star City, since they were still emotional, where she would torture Starfire and Cyborg with fear hallucinations. Cyborg would manage to break out of his dream, and since he's so close with Starfire, he was able to talk her through hers. And Starfire would take a Phobia, which I actually thought was a pretty cool thing to see, but how we saw these two heroes breaking down, and while yes, Phobia is needed for this, it doesn't exactly have to be her. It could have been Psycho Pirate or Dr. Destiny. However, I think it was nice to give it to Phobia, because I think she really needed it. In the New 2, her Warp and Plasmus were all reworked into being Blue Beetle villains. Here, she finally got to shine her power set because she was now the leader of this trio. However, after a while, they did kind of figure out how powerful Jaime Reyes was, and her Warp and Plasmus were all worried. To the point where Warp and Plasmus actually ditched their leader. Therefore, Phobia went after Blue Beetle on her own, and she lost. Then in Rebirth, she would return again, this time working for Deathstroke during Dark Crisis, where she seems to kind of have a second-in-charge role here, with her being present at multiple moments with Slade, and helps to hurt the minds of the Titans and other heroes. She was also ever so briefly in the Teen Titans show as a part of the Brotherhood of Evil, but in the background. In fact, she doesn't even use her powers. However, you can tell it is her from her design. And she would also appear in the Titan comics where she was given more to do. Phobia as a character, in my opinion, is okay. There are a lot of empaths out there, but something I think she could work better as is if she was the main villain to Raven. As the two were kind of paired up back in the 80s, but it kind of got dropped. In my opinion, I think they should bring that back, because having two empaths fighting could really draw parallels to their abandonment issues with their families. It could be an interesting idea. And that's it. Like always, please like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.